The wind whispered through the open plains, rustling brittle grass as twilight deepened. The sky stretched vast and endless, streaked with the last light of day, fading into the oncoming dark. Evelyn wiped her brow, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. The day had been long, the toil unrelenting. But if she didn't work, she didn't eat. Leo dashed past her, kicking up dust in his wake, his laughter breaking the quiet. His frame was small, but his energy boundless. Still a boy, untouched by the weight of the world. Evelyn watched him with a tired smile, allowing herself a fleeting moment of warmth. "Did you see that, Ev?" he called, holding up a rabbit he'd snared. His green eyes shone with pride. "You're getting faster," she said, ruffling his dusty hair. "That'll make a fine stew tonight." Their world was small, a lone cabin standing against the wilderness, but it had been enough. She had built something here, clawing her way through grief after losing Daniel. She never expected to be left a widow so soon, raising her younger brother alone. But she had fought. She had survived. And she had been winning. Until now, the first sign was the silence. Her heart clenched as an eerie stillness settled over the land. The usual chorus of the night, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, the distant call of an owl, vanished. Replaced by something far worse, absolute quiet. Leo sensed it too. His small hands clutched the rabbit tighter, his grin faltering. "Ev?" She raised a hand, signaling him to stay put, her pulse quickening. Then she heard it. The distant thunder of hooves, dread clawed at her stomach. She knew what that meant inside. Now. Leo didn't hesitate. He bolted for the cabin as she followed, heart hammering. She barely had time to slam the door before the riders appeared. 5 of them. Silhouettes dark against the fading light. Outlaws, they moved like wraiths, too confident, too at ease. The leader, a hulking figure with a jagged scar across his cheek, dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dirt as he strode forward. He stopped just shy of the porch. "Evening, miss," he drawled, his voice thick with false politeness. Evelyn's grip tightened around the rifle she had grabbed the moment she heard the hooves. "You need to leave." The outlaw smirked, yellowed teeth showing beneath his scruffy beard. "Now, that ain't very hospitable. We're just passing through." "Liar, you wouldn't stop at a lonely homestead unless you meant to take something." His grin widened. "Smart girl." The next moments blurred. A gunshot cracked the air. Evelyn flinched as wood splintered near her shoulder. Leo screamed. The outlaws surged forward. The cabin door burst open under their weight, and suddenly they were inside. She fired. Missed. The leader knocked the rifle from her hands with a brutal swing, sending it clattering to the floor. Pain exploded through her wrist. She fought, kicking, clawing, biting. It didn't matter. Rough hands grabbed her, yanking her arms behind her back. She struggled, but their grip was unyielding. Leo screamed her name, his small fists useless against men twice his size. "A sparrow against wolves, let me go." Evelyn snarled, twisting, desperate. The outlaw chuckled. "Feisty. I like that." Terror lanced through her, then Leo lunged. The rusty old knife he'd grabbed from the table slashed wildly. One of them cursed as the blade nicked his arm. A mistake. The gunshot was deafening. For a moment, the world stood still. Leo wavered. His hands clutched his stomach. Darkness spread across his shirt, his lips parted in shock. No sound came. Evelyn screamed. She tore free with a strength she didn't know she had, collapsing to the floor just as Leo crumpled beside her. Blood seeped into the cracks of the wooden planks. Small fingers trembled, reaching for her, and then, her vision blurred with tears. "I'm here. I'm here, Oliver. Stay with me." But his once bright eyes were already fading. A rough hand yanked her up by the hair. "No time for crying, sweetheart. We gotta move." She fought like a wild animal, but grief had drained the last of her strength. Oliver was gone. Her home was burning. The outlaws were dragging her into the night. Above, the sky remained indifferent, the stars watching as if nothing had changed. But for Eleanor, everything had. She drifted in and out of awareness, pain a dull throb beneath the crushing weight of exhaustion. The world blurred, a haze of shifting shadows and relentless movement. The scent of sweat, blood, and damp earth filled her nostrils, mingling with the acrid tang of gunpowder clinging to her torn dress. Her wrists were bound with coarse rope, the fibers biting into her skin. Her throat ached from screaming, but her voice had long since failed. They rode hard, their laughter low and guttural, like wolves circling wounded prey. She kept her gaze down, her mind refusing to accept what had happened. Oliver's pale, lifeless face lingered at the edge of her vision, and she swallowed the sob rising in her throat. This was not the time for mourning. She had to survive. The leader, the one with the jagged scar, glanced at her, his eyes gleaming in the dim moonlight. "You keep quiet, maybe we'll find a use for you," he muttered. Her stomach twisted. She clenched her fists, nails biting into her palms, forcing herself not to react. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to run, but what good would it do? She was outnumbered, unarmed. The only thing keeping her alive was their amusement, and that wouldn't last forever. The landscape shifted, open plains giving way to dense forest. Trees loomed overhead, their branches clawing at the sky. The air grew colder, sending shivers through her despite the lingering heat of the outlaws' campfires. She needed a chance, any chance, to escape. But none came. Then it happened. One moment, the outlaws were laughing, their guard down. The next, a sharp whistle sliced through the air. The first man fell, an arrow buried deep in his throat. His body hit the ground with a heavy thud. The others barely had time to react before more arrows rained down, striking with deadly precision. Horses reared. Men cursed. The night erupted into chaos. Eleanor twisted against her bindings, her heartbeat a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. She had no idea who was attacking, but one thing was clear: they weren't with the outlaws. Gunfire cracked, but the attackers moved like ghosts, slipping through the shadows with lethal precision. A second outlaw slumped forward in his saddle, an arrow lodged in his chest. The scarred leader roared in fury. "It's an ambush. Ride." Eleanor was yanked roughly as her captor spurred his horse forward. But before they could flee, a figure emerged from the trees. A warrior, dark paint streaked his sharp features. Long black hair, braided and adorned with beads, gleamed in the dim light. He moved with quiet, deadly grace, his bow already drawn. For the briefest moment, his piercing gaze met hers. Then, his arrow flew, the outlaw holding her captive jolted as the arrow struck. Eleanor hit the ground hard, the breath ripped from her lungs. Gasping, she rolled onto her side as battle raged around her. The remaining outlaws scattered, their numbers dwindling beneath the precise assault. The scarred leader turned his horse, cursing as he disappeared into the night. Silence fell. Eleanor lay motionless, barely daring to breathe. Every muscle ached, her wrists raw from the ropes. Slowly, she turned her head. The warrior stood over her, bow lowered. He was taller than she'd expected, his lean frame radiating strength. His expression remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't quite place. He knelt beside her, reaching for the bindings around her wrists. She flinched, instinct taking over. "Stay back," she rasped. He didn't react, only unsheathed a knife. The blade glinted briefly before slicing through her restraints. The ropes fell away, leaving deep red welts on her skin. She flexed her fingers, the pain sharp but bearable. "You are safe," he said, his voice low and measured. His English was accented but clear. She swallowed, her throat dry. Who are you?" He studied her for a moment before answering, "Kaelin." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he carried himself, the quiet command in his stance, the way the other warriors deferred to him, told her he was someone of importance. She pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest. The forest around them was eerily still, the bodies of her captors sprawled lifeless across the earth. The warriors moved swiftly, gathering weapons and checking their fallen. Kaelin stood and offered his hand. She hesitated. Trusting a stranger was dangerous. Trusting a man like him, when she had spent her whole life hearing tales of raids and bloodshed, was unthinkable. But he had saved her. And right now, he was the only thing standing between her and death. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady. With effortless strength, he pulled her to her feet. She swayed, dizziness from exhaustion threatening to pull her under, but he caught her elbow, keeping her steady. "You need rest," he murmured. She wanted to protest, to demand answers, to run, but her body had other plans. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the flicker of firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. She woke to the scent of smoke and the murmur of voices speaking a language she did not understand. Blinking, she sat up, her head pounding. A thick blanket was wrapped around her, her dress still torn and dirty but no longer damp with sweat and blood. A small fire crackled nearby, its glow casting flickering shadows against the towering trees. Kaelin sat across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate movements. He glanced up, his gaze steady. "You are awake." She swallowed, her throat still raw. "Where am I?" "Safe," he said simply, her fingers curled into the blanket, her mind racing. "Why did you help me?" He set the knife aside, considering her. "You were a prisoner." She exhaled sharply. "People like you hate people like me. I was raised to fear you." He didn't react, only tilted his head slightly. "You were raised with stories. Stories are not always truth." She opened her mouth to argue but found she had no strength for it. Instead, she dropped her gaze to her hands, the bruises stark against her pale skin. Oliver was gone. Her home was gone. Everything she had fought for, everything she had clung to, had turned to ash. A lump formed in her throat. She closed her eyes, willing the grief away. After a long silence, Kaelin spoke again. "You cannot go back." Her eyes snapped open. "What?" "The men who took you, they will return. Others will come. You are not safe there." She wanted to deny it, to insist she could rebuild. But deep down, she knew he was right. She had nowhere to go. Nothing left. A long, shaky breath escaped her lips. "Then what do I do?" Kaelin's gaze never wavered. "You come with me." The words sent a shiver through her. Go with him, this warrior, into a world she did not know, among people who had always been her enemies. But the alternative was worse. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with quiet resolve. "All right," she whispered. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. As Eleanor followed Kaelin through the wilderness, every step sent a dull ache through her battered body, but she refused to complain. She had learned quickly, weakness had no place in this world. The path ahead was uncertain, grief pressing heavily upon her, but she had chosen this. Chosen survival. There was no turning back. Kalen moved ahead of her, his strides sure and steady, his presence as unshakable as the land itself. He barely spoke, only gesturing when necessary. It should have unsettled her, the silence between them. But strangely, it didn't. There was an understanding in it, a quiet reassurance that words were not always needed. He'd saved her life. And for now, that was enough. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She had been raised to fear men like him, taught that their ways were cruel, that their hearts held no mercy. Yet he had shown her kindness, given her warmth when the world had left her cold. She didn't know what to make of him, the way he moved, the way he carried an unseen weight. Just as she did, they walked for miles, weaving through dense forests and crossing narrow streams, the land growing wilder with every step. Kale moved with an effortless grace she envied, his steps sure, his hands steady. He belonged to this world in a way she never could, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly small. When they stopped near a stream, Kale knelt to drink, cupping the water in his hands. Evelyn hesitated before following his lead, the icy liquid shocking her parched throat. The silence stretched until she finally spoke. "How far are we going?" Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. Kale glanced at her, considering. "Far enough that they won't follow." She frowned, brushing a strand of loose hair from her face. He met her gaze, his dark eyes unreadable. "And then?" "Then you decide." It was an answer, and not an answer, leaving her unsettled. She wanted certainty, a plan, something solid to hold on to. But the wilderness offered no such comforts. They pressed on, the terrain growing rougher as they climbed into the hills. The sun cast long shadows through the trees, exhaustion creeping in. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest, but she bit her tongue, unwilling to show weakness. When they finally stopped for the night, she sank onto the ground, her legs trembling beneath her. Kale moved with practiced ease, building a fire with quick, efficient motions. She watched him, fascinated despite herself. He wasted nothing, every motion deliberate, every choice precise. "You've done this before," she murmured. He looked up, a flicker of amusement in his gaze. "Many times." She hugged her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. "I haven't." "I know." There was no judgment in his tone, but it still stung. Of course, he knew. She was just a settler's daughter, raised behind wooden walls and plowed fields. Out here, she was as helpless as a newborn. Frustration burned in her chest. "I don't want to be useless," she admitted, surprising herself. Kale tilted his head, studying her. Then, without a word, he handed her a knife. She blinked at it. "What?" "Skin it." She followed his gaze and froze. A freshly killed rabbit lay in front of her, its glassy eyes staring up, lifeless and still. Her stomach twisted. "I don't," she started. "You want to learn." She swallowed hard. He was right. If she wanted to survive, she had to stop waiting for others to save her. Gritting her teeth, she took the knife. Her hand trembled, but she mimicked his movements, cutting with slow, deliberate strokes. The work was clumsy, messy, but she forced herself through it. By the time she finished, her hands were sticky with blood, her stomach churning, but she had done it. Kale nodded approvingly. "You will learn." She met his gaze, something shifting between them. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering respect, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the smallest spark of pride. They ate in quiet companionship, the fire casting flickering shadows against the trees. The meat was tough and unseasoned, but it filled the emptiness inside her. She chewed slowly, stealing glances at Kale as he ate with calm efficiency. Finally, she asked, "Why did you help me?" Kale was silent for a long moment before answering. Because they would have killed you. She frowned. That's not much of a reason. His gaze flickered to the fire. A long time ago, men like them killed someone I loved. I couldn't stop it then. But I could stop this. Something in his voice sent a shiver through her. It was the same pain she carried, the same hollow ache of loss. She had thought she was alone in it, but here, in the stillness of the wild, she realized she was not. I'm sorry, she whispered. Kale didn't look at her, but he gave a small nod, acknowledging something neither of them spoke aloud. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Evelyn found herself studying him, the sharp angles of his face, the way the firelight danced in his dark eyes. He was unlike any man she had ever known, calm, measured, unshaken. She expected to feel fear. Instead, she felt safe. It unsettled her. As the fire burned low, exhaustion pulled at her limbs. She curled beneath the blanket he had given her body aching, her mind racing. Sleep, Kale said softly. She wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't tired, but her body betrayed her. Her eyes drifted shut, and for the first time since the night her world had been torn apart, she let go. The next day, the lessons continued. Kale showed her how to move soundlessly through the woods, how to read the tracks of passing animals, how to tell which plants would nourish rather than poison. She stumbled, failed, cursed under her breath. But he remained patient, and slowly, she began to change. She no longer flinched at the weight of a blade in her hand. Her steps grew surer, her body stronger. The woman who had once been dragged away, helpless and broken, was fading. In her place, someone new was emerging, someone who could survive. Kale watched her with quiet approval, never offering praise, yet never doubting her either. She found herself drawn to him, not just for his skill, but for the way he carried himself, steady and unshaken, making the world feel a little less uncertain. One evening, as the fire crackled between them, she asked, "Where will you go?" Kale's gaze lingered on the flames. "Where I'm needed." She studied him, something twisting inside her. "And if no one needed you?" He was silent for a long moment before answering. "Then I'd find a place." Evelyn hesitated, her heart pounding. Could that place be with someone? His eyes met hers, the firelight flickering between them. Something unspoken passed between them, fragile, yet undeniable. Kale didn't answer. But he didn't look away. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She didn't know what the future held, what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time, she did not fear it. She had survived, and perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't meant to survive alone. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth as Evelyn rode beside Kale. The rhythmic thud of hooves against the forest floor blended with the distant cry of a hawk overhead. The sky stretched vast and endless above them, making the world feel limitless. The wilderness had changed her. Gone was the grief-stricken woman who had been torn from her burning home. In her place stood someone sharper, leaner, hardened by fire. She had learned to read the land, to hear the warning in distant rustling, to trust her instincts as if they were an extension of her body. But nothing had prepared her for this. Kale rode ahead, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He had always been a man of few words, but tonight, his silence carried a different weight. They had tracked the movements of the man called Crow and the remnants of his gang for days, and now, they were close, too close. A heavy feeling settled in Evelyn's chest, an ache that had nothing to do with exhaustion. The past had caught up to them. It had always been heading this way. A reckoning. Kale pulled his horse to a stop on the ridge, overlooking a valley. Below, the flickering light of a campfire cut through the darkness. 3 figures huddled around the flames. Crow's men. Evelyn's fingers curled around the hilt of the knife at her hip. The thought of facing them again sent a thrill of fear through her. But beneath it, something colder, revenge. She dismounted, stepping lightly. Her heart pounded in a steady rhythm against her ribs. Kale watched her, his dark eyes giving nothing away. He had trained her for this, not for vengeance, but for survival. Yet now, as she stood beside him, a question hung unspoken in the air. Would she do what needed to be done? A sharp crack of laughter echoed from the camp below, sending a pulse of anger through her. Crow, his voice had haunted her nightmares, lurked in the corners of her mind where Samuel's last breath still lingered. Now, he was within reach. Kale touched her arm, grounding her before she could move. Breathe, he murmured. Not for anger. Not for hate. For life. Her jaw tightened. But she nodded. She would not let rage guide her hand. They moved as shadows through the trees, their footsteps silent. The fire crackled ahead, its light flickering against the rough faces of the men who had destroyed her world. Crow sat hunched over, chewing on a strip of dried meat, oblivious to the fate creeping toward him. Kale raised his bow. The string pulled taut. The arrow aimed true, but before he could release it, Evelyn stepped forward. This one is mine, she whispered. Kale hesitated only for a moment before giving a small nod. Her heart pounded as she crept closer, her breath steady. Crow turned just as she reached him, his eyes widening in shock, then narrowing in recognition. You, he sneered, pushing himself to his feet. Evelyn took a step forward, gripping the knife tightly. Across the fire, Crow sneered. Didn't think I'd see you again. Behind her, the others stirred, but Kale was already moving, swift and deadly, cutting them down before they could react. Crow's grin widened, the fire casting deep shadows across his scarred face. Gonna try to kill me, little girl? She didn't answer. She lunged, the blade met flesh, slicing deep into his arm. He snarled in pain. He swung at her, but she was faster now, no longer the terrified woman he had dragged from her home. He reached for his gun. She didn't let him. A sharp kick sent him stumbling, and in the space of a breath, she was on him, her knife pressing against his throat. He stilled, his breath ragged. Go on then, he spat. Do it. Her hands trembled. The moment stretched, heavy, suffocating. She could end it. She could take from him as he had taken from her, but Kale's words echoed in her mind, not for anger. Not for hate. For life. Slowly, she withdrew the knife. Crow's sneer returned, but it was short-lived. The final arrow found its mark, piercing his chest. His body slumped to the ground. Lifeless, Evelyn exhaled, her breath shaky, the weight of it all pressing down on her. Kale stepped beside her. You chose. She met his gaze. I did. They left the camp behind, the fire smoldering into embers, the ghosts of the past finally silenced. As they rode into the open plains, something between them shifted. The air felt lighter. The road ahead, no longer shrouded in shadow. Evelyn turned to Kale, watching the way the wind played through his dark hair, the quiet strength in his posture. Where will we go? She asked. He considered for a moment before answering. Where the sky is wide, and the rivers run free. She smiled, the first real smile in what felt like a lifetime. That sounds like a place I'd like to see. Kale reached for her hand, calloused and warm against her own, and together, they rode into the unknown.